Predicting the future is hard, and it only gets harder the further into the future you try to look. Even for meteorologists, whose entire job is to predict the future, their accuracy falls from 98% when predicting the weather for the next 24 hours to about 50% for a 10-day forecast. And the accuracy that they do have is based on computer analysis of weather patterns and lots of maths and stuff. But when it comes to most predictions for the future, especially those predicting things that are years or decades away, they're generally just based on vibes rather than careful analysis of empirical data. This is why they are wrong much more often than they're right, and why it's so impressive when people can make accurate predictions about future events or inventions. So today we'll be looking at 5 people throughout history who accurately forecast the future, some of whom made many more than a single correct prediction. For much of the First World War, the Allied nations operated independently. The Allies were, of course, working towards a common goal, but because there was no single person in charge of all the Allied forces, it often led to problems with coordination and efficiency. Once the Germans began their spring offensive in 1918, the Allies recognized that they needed a unified command. French general and recently appointed Marshal of France Ferdinand Foch was appointed to Commander-in-Chief of the Allied armies, now known as the Supreme Allied Commander. This gave him command of all Allied forces and was a major turning point in the war. He was able to coordinate French, American, British and Italian troops to stop the German offensive, and just 8 months after his appointment, the Armistice of Compiègne was signed inside Foch's private railway car, ending World War I. However, while the armistice ended hostilities, it was not the final terms of peace between Germany and the Allies. Those would be worked out the following year at the Paris Peace Conference, where the Treaty of Versailles was written and signed. Peace negotiations began in January of 1919 and lasted for months, but the negotiations were only between the leaders of the Allied nations. The Central Powers, especially Germany, weren't allowed to weigh in on the terms of the peace. Alright, just before we continue with today's video, let's talk about skincare. Don't skip ahead just yet. I know you're thinking, Simon, this isn't a beauty channel. What are you doing talking about skincare? That's not my thing, but hear me out, because the UFO 3 by Foreo Sweden might just be about to change that. And this isn't any skincare gadget. It's a deep facial hydration device. This little thing is like having spa facials in the palm of your hands. You don't have to even leave your couch. In just 2 minutes, it increases skin moisture by 126% and reduces wrinkles in just a week. Honestly, who doesn't want to look a bit younger, a bit more fresh? Why not? I'm rapidly approaching middle age. It's a good time to do something like this. Maybe it's a good time for you too. Maybe it's a fantastic gift for a significant other. Why not? They've got cooling cryotherapy as well, which depuffs your face so you can say goodbye to those tired under eye bags. And if you're anything like me, a skincare routine isn't exactly a thing, but the UFO 3 makes it easy. It's a perfect gift for that special someone or just as a treat for yourself. Plus, it's got a special app so you can customize your routine without needing a degree in skincare. So check out the link below and you'll enjoy a 30% discount on the UFO 3. Plus, the first 50 people who use the code SIDEPJ10 will get an extra 10% off. Sack fast, grab your UFO 3 today. Big thanks to Foreo for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode. The Treaty of Versailles is a contentious topic, and many have attributed it to causing the rise of fascism in Germany and ultimately being a direct cause of World War II. It is sometimes viewed as being too harsh, especially the economic burden placed on Germany, but Foch believed that the treaty was far too lenient. None of the major fighting in World War I had taken place in Germany, but if a treaty were not signed, then fighting would continue on German soil this time. The German government was already unstable, and Foch believed that the German people would not have accepted any government that allowed the devastation of their homeland from continued war. As such, Foch believed that Germany had to agree to any demands they made, and he wanted them to surrender the Rhineland to France. President Woodrow Wilson and Prime Minister David Lloyd George objected to this annexation, as they felt that turning the Rhineland into a French military base of operations would swing the balance of power too far in France's favour. Ultimately, the Treaty of Versailles could be viewed as a middle ground that led to the worst possible outcome. The treaty was too harsh in that the war guilt clause caused Germany to effectively accept sole responsibility for the war. This, combined with the onerous timeline of reparations payments and eventually the Great Depression, fueled a lot of resentment of the Allies and the German people. But it was too lenient in that it did not do enough to prevent Germany from rebuilding, and the provisions intended to prevent that often weren't enforced when Germany violated them, like when they began remilitarizing the Rhineland. It's impossible to say how history would have played out with a different Treaty of Versailles, but Foch was confident of how it was going to play out with this treaty. He believed that nothing short of a permanent occupation of the Rhinelands by the French military would prevent future aggression. As the treaty was being signed, he angrily declared, "This is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. 20 years and 64 days later, Germany invaded Poland, beginning World War II. Even though she died nearly a century before the first programmable computer was built, Ada Lovelace is often cited as having written the first computer program. Born in 1815, Ada was the only legitimate child of famed poet Lord Byron. However, Byron left England shortly after she was born, never to return. Ada was usually left in the care of her grandmother, as she and her mother were not close, and her mother didn't even seem particularly interested in raising a child. Ada's life, including her childhood, was plagued by illness. She was even paralyzed from a bout of measles as a teenager. However, her childhood was also filled with the study of maths and science. Her mother perceived Lord Byron to be insane, and she felt that these intellectual pursuits would help prevent insanity from befalling her daughter. That worked out. Ada was talented in maths and absolutely fascinated by it. Her love of maths dominated most of her adult life, short as it may have been. It certainly helped that Ada's social status allowed her to meet and correspond with scientists and mathematicians like Andrew Cross, Michael Faraday, and perhaps most importantly, Charles Babbage. Babbage is often regarded as being the father of the computer, thanks to his invention of the difference engine. The difference engine was a large mechanical calculator, though it was never completed as planned. Building a machine on the scale that Babbage intended would have been far too expensive at the time, so only a smaller version was constructed. Though this smaller version could only handle smaller numbers, it showed that the design did work as intended. But this was not the height of Babbage's ambition. In 1837, he designed the analytical engine, a mechanical engine that would essentially function like a general-purpose computer. In 1840, he gave a lecture in French on his analytical engine at the University of Turin. The lecture was transcribed and published in French, and Ada was then commissioned to translate the publication into English. It took her over a year to do so, but she also included her own notes to supplement the original paper. The final of these notes is regarded as the first ever computer program. It was an algorithm she designed specifically for the analytical machine that would allow it to calculate but only numbers. It was also in these notes where Ada made her famous predictions. The focus of Babbage's inventions was on maths, but Ada understood that these machines could do much more than that. The machine could manipulate symbols, in this case numbers, by some set of rules that could be set by the user. She argued that if other things, such as musical notes, could be expressed and manipulated in this same way, that the machines could be used to compose elaborate pieces of music and much more. Essentially, she was describing how modern computers work and predicted their myriad of applications. But she even took it a step further, predicting the limitations of current artificial intelligence. She wrote, "The analytical engine has no pretensions whatsoever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform, but it has no power of anticipating any relations or truths. Its province is to assist us in making available what we already are acquainted with. In less antiquated language, AI can't do anything unless it's told exactly how to do it. This has even led to the creation of an alternative to the Turing test called the Lovelace test, in which an AI would have to create something original, usually of an artistic nature, without human input." Dmitri Mendeleev was a Russian chemist and inventor from the 19th century. Though he made various advancements in the field of chemistry, he is best known as being the creator of the periodic table of elements. But Mendeleev was not the first person to attempt the creation of such a table. Other contemporary chemists had tried as well, and anyone who attempted to arrange the elements began noticing some repeating patterns with the properties of the elements based on their atomic weight. However, what separated Mendeleev's table was that he organized elements not only by their weight, but by their valence, or the number of electrons in the outer shell that were able to take part in a chemical reaction. When arranged in this way, Mendeleev noticed many repeating patterns in the characteristics of the elements. He was even able to use these insights to correct previously accepted values for some of the existing elements. At the time that Mendeleev published his periodic table, there were 63 known elements. But his table extended beyond just those 63. There were some gaps in the chart, and he identified that elements should exist to fill those gaps. For example, Mendeleev predicted the existence of atomic element 32, which he called eka-silicon, meaning that it was one below silicon. Using the table he had created, he was able to extrapolate not only what the missing elements were, but their properties as well, with considerable accuracy. Mendeleev is most recognized for predicting the existence and properties of elements 21, 31, and 32, scandium, gallium, and germanium. These garnered the most attention, as their discoveries were all made while Mendeleev was still alive and actively working in chemistry, but they were not his only predictions. He also correctly predicted technetium, element 43, though this was not discovered until decades after his death. Unfortunately, not all of Mendelev's predictions were quite as accurate as those. While the foundation for his predictions was accurate and his logic was sound, there was one oversight. Mendelev's table did not make any distinction between rare earth metals and transition metals. So, as he moved on to heavier elements, Mendelev's predictions became less accurate. Robert Boyle was born in 1627, during the Scientific Revolution. This was an interesting time, as there was still a lot of belief in magic and the supernatural, even in the scientific community. To that end, while Boyle is often regarded as the first modern chemist and one of the founders of chemistry, he was also an alchemist. He was so convinced that alchemical transmutation was possible that he even played a large role in having the Gold and Silver Act of 1403 repealed, a law that had made it illegal to create gold and silver through alchemical means. Ironically, Boyle didn't actually have a need for gold and silver. His father, Richard Boyle, was the first Earl of Cork, and he passed away when Boyle was a teenager, leaving behind a large inheritance. Since he was independently wealthy, this gave Boyle the resources and freedom to engage in scientific pursuits without the need to seek funding from wealthy patrons. This was a big advantage, as he didn't need to answer to people who were seeking some sort of return on their investment. As a scientist, Boyle made advancements in physics and chemistry and is most famous for Boyle's law, which describes the inverse relationship between pressure and volume of a confined gas. He also conducted experiments in physiology, particularly with regards to respiration, though Boyle said that these experiments were hindered by the tenderness of his nature, as he didn't have the stomach to vivisect test subjects. In 1660, the Royal Society was officially founded, with Boyle as one of its founding members. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1663, and he was even elected president, though he declined the position. However, it was in the 1660s that he wrote his wish list of inventions that he hoped future scientists would accomplish. This is often regarded as his predictions for the future, especially because the inventions were all of a practical nature. Because Boyle was an alchemist, and there was still much belief in magic at the time, despite being well into the scientific revolution, not all of his predictions have come to pass. For example, his predictions included transmutation of metals and transmutation of species in minerals, animals, and vegetables, which really isn't possible. He also predicted the cure of wounds at a distance. While some have claimed this was a prediction of remote surgery, where doctors can use robots to perform surgery on a patient thousands of miles away, that's not actually what Boyle meant. Curing at a distance was a reference to sympathetic magic, for example, weapon salves. There was the belief that by applying a salve to the weapon that caused a wound rather than to the wound itself, that the wound might be healed. Obviously, that's not real. However, Boyle was right more than he was wrong. One of his predictions was the curing of diseases at a distance, or at least by transplantation. Organ transplants were a relatively novel idea, and it would be hundreds of years before the first successful organ transplant. He also predicted flight, longer lifespans, GPS, perpetual light, meaning electricity, GMO crops, and medications to treat pain, insomnia, and mental health. The last of his 24 wishes was varnishes perfumable by rubbing, meaning that he essentially predicted scratch and sniff stickers. There is one particularly strange prediction he made, though, as it didn't seem to have a basis in either science or magic. Among his predictions was the emulation of fish without engines by custom and education only. Boyle seemed to be suggesting that with enough practice and knowledge, people could function normally underwater without the aid of machines or equipment. Perhaps had he gone through with those vivisections on both humans and fish to examine their respiratory systems, he would have better understood why that particular wish simply wasn't going to happen. It's customary at the start of a new year for people to publish predictions about future events. This is even more true at the start of a new century, as humans have a love of round numbers. One such set of predictions came from John Elfreth Watkins Jr. in an article in Ladies' Home Journal. Watkins was a former engineer and current writer for the Saturday Evening Post, and Ladies' Home Journal was their sister publication. In Watkins's article titled "What May Happen in the Next 100 Years," he laid out dozens of predictions of things that may happen by the year 2001. More of these predictions were correct than wrong, but in all fairness, they don't appear to be his predictions either. In the brief foreword to the article, Watkins stated that he consulted the best scientific minds of the day and asked for predictions in their particular field of expertise. Though he claimed to merely be transcribing the opinions of others, he still would have chosen which opinions to print and which not to, so he is certainly still deserving of at least some of the credit. Of course, when you're predicting that many things, they aren't all going to be correct, and those that were wrong were often hilariously wrong. For example, he predicted predicted that C, X, and Q would have been removed from the alphabet. While it's true that those 3 letters are wholly unnecessary and redundant in English, getting everyone to abandon their use would be a daunting task to say the least. There may have been a time when they could have been phased out, but the ship has likely sailed on that dream. In that same entry, Watkins did correctly predict that English would be the most spoken language in the world, though he incorrectly guessed that Russian would be in 2nd place. It's currently in 8th. Another remarkably incorrect prediction was that everything that wasn't absolutely necessary for human survival would be extinct. Watkins wrote that flies, mosquitoes, cockroaches, mice, and rats would have all been driven to extinction. Horses would be nearly extinct, with a small amount still being owned by the wealthy for racing and hunting. He also claimed that there would be no wild animals except in menageries. Though it's estimated that 543 species went extinct in the 1900s, that's a far cry from all of the wild animals. Then again, it's probably for the best that this prediction was wrong. Like we said though, a lot of his predictions were correct. The article correctly predicted air conditioning and central heat for houses, military tanks, greenhouses with grow lights, and electric climate control to allow for growing year-round, and the ability to quickly ship refrigerated produce from one hemisphere to the other, allowing for year-round produce. Some of these predictions were incredibly specific, such as that the average American would be 1 to 2 inches taller. The average height in 2000 was 2 inches taller than in 1900. He also predicted that the US population would be 350 to 500 million. Though this overshot the mark a bit, as the population had not yet hit 300 million by 2000, it still showed movement in the correct direction. The US population had been increasing at an incredible rate, and if that rate had continued over the course of the 1900s, then the population would have exceeded 1 billion. However, of all of Watkins's predictions, the ones that garnered the most attention in recent years were his predictions of digital photography, cell phones, and television. Though the mechanisms for how things like digital photography would work was not understood, he wrote, "Photographs will be telegraphed from any distance. If there be a battle in China 100 years hence, snapshots of its most striking events will be published in newspapers an hour later. Photographs will reproduce all of nature's colors." Though Watkins was more right than wrong in his predictions, there was one more mistake he made that was very common for the time. Rather than envisioning the streamlining of supply chain efficiency so that goods could be delivered right to a person's door by cars and trucks with incredible turnaround times, he, like many others, predicted that everything from mail to cooked and plated meals would be delivered to people's homes using pneumatic tubes stretching hundreds of miles. Once again, probably for the best that he got this one wrong.